Okay, so move over to the right side of the mat and then move your legs and arms and everything to the left, but keep your right hip on the ground, okay? And you should begin to feel a stretch right in here. And those are your muscles, and we're actually targeting the spine, but the thing that is the most restricted will stretch. And so for the vast majority of people, it's going to be a muscular restriction here. Okay, they're not actually going to take their spine to its limit. They're rather taking their muscles to their limit. Okay, so we want to feel just a gentle stretching in here. All right, and as usual, we want to feel safe. We want to feel the stretch, and we want to be able to hold it. So last night was a great example. I had a gentleman, I don't know if he'd not ever done any yin or it was his first yin, it was certainly his first yin class with me. And he was wiggling the whole time. We were doing this posture and he was like uncrossing his legs, bending his knees, bringing his arms down, just the whole time wiggling around, moving. Okay, now, why is that a problem? Because the benefit of yin comes from a prolonged, held stretch. I can't change that. That's physiology. Okay, that's not like it's not an opinion. It's not, oh, you should do it this way because, you know, the yoga tradition says that that's the most benefit. It's like, no, physiologically speaking, you will miss some of the benefits of this stretch if you're releasing the stretch, you're coming out of it, you're moving around the whole time. Okay, so that's what I want everyone to understand is we practice yin the way that we do because it has very specific physiological benefits. Yes, it will also affect our nervous system in a certain way. It'll affect our, you know, you could say emotions in a certain way. It might even affect us spiritually in a certain way. But that isn't the main basis of why we practice the way we do. If we choose to ignore the instructions and wiggle and move and keep coming in and out of the pose, then the purported benefits physiologically, we just won't be getting those benefits. It's as simple as that. Okay, let's switch sides. So the reason I try and really drive this point home is because what can happen, and I see it happening in classes that I teach, not often, but it does happen. You know, people will ignore the instructions from the teacher for whatever reason. Maybe because they're in a lot of pain or discomfort. Maybe because they think the teacher doesn't know what they're talking about. Um, Maybe they just like being a contrarian and they just whenever they're told to do something they do the opposite. You know, that there are all kinds of reasons why people might ignore what a teacher is saying. But what I'm trying to drive home here is if you want the benefits of doing this practice, and if you don't, then the question arises, well, why are you here? Why are you doing it? Right? If you don't want the benefits that come with this practice, then you know, it's like you should be doing something else. So for someone to pay for a class and show up, but then ignore what the teacher is encouraging them to do just doesn't really make sense. Now, again, I understand that if you're in a lot of pain, it may be difficult for you to do that, but then you should ask for help, right? And that's the thing that I don't see is that people will be struggling or wiggling. They're not following the instructions, but then they also aren't saying, "Hey, this is my problem. Can you help me with that?" And I know there are all sorts of reasons why people might do that. A lot of us early on, this certainly happened to me, when I was in a situation with a teacher, if I asked too many questions, if I was having a hard time, very often I was embarrassed, right? I was made to feel like the idiot. I was made to feel like, I was doing something stupid or wrong. So I feel like many people probably had that experience with a teacher. And so we're afraid to speak up. If we don't want to stand out, right? We just want to blend in to the class. And certainly in my experience, a lot of times if I didn't understand something or I was confused, I was not encouraged to clarify that. And from my perspective as a professional teacher, that's a huge problem. Teachers should be encouraging students to ask questions when they're confused. Otherwise, what the heck are you doing there? What is your job? But the way many teachers present their information is like, here's all the information. You should understand it just one time through. And if you ask a question, you're being an idiot. You weren't listening. You weren't paying attention. Something is wrong with you. So again, I've certainly had this experience and you may have as well. All right, let's come on out of that. So this is where, again, I think, and I get it. I understand the teacher's perspective because you took all this time to explain something and someone just isn't getting it. It can get frustrating. But that is your job. You might get frustrated, but that is your job. And I don't think it's appropriate or helpful to shame or embarrass a student for asking you to do your job, which is explain it. I posted something on my Patreon by Simon, I can't pronounce his last name, but he wrote a book, Find Your Why, which is a really great book. And he sort of explains how he'll go into these high-level meetings with people and he'll be the idiot, what he calls the idiot. He'll be like, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. And this person's up there with flow charts and all this stuff. And he says when he admits that, over time, all the high-level CEOs and experts and all these people who are nodding their head like they understood, they start saying, yeah, I don't understand either, right? So it's like everyone's afraid to look like, the idiot, to look like they're not getting it. Everyone else is just nodding their head. So again, I have to encourage you, please, please, please don't do that. Okay, let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it out a bit. And then we continue with what's called a cattail. Okay, so to do that, we'll take the left leg straight up and we drop it over to the right. You can prop your head up for now and then take the legs apart, take them wide, okay? Then you want to bend this knee, reach back, grab the foot, and you should feel a stretch in the front of your thigh. Now you can lean back into this. This is a twist. Okay, it's both a twist and it's helping us warm up our thighs, the quadricep muscle group, because what we're going to do next will require that flexibility in the quads there, okay? So we're leaning back, finding that stretch, and we can breathe there, just working that. Okay, so all of that, again, it is something that hopefully I'm, encouraging you to not be afraid to ask a teacher to do their job, even if she gets annoyed, if she rolls her eyes, even if she's trying to embarrass you. I mean, the fact of the matter is, what is a teacher's job, right? To guide and explain things and help you to understand. But so often the way that, at least again, in my experience, you may be able to relate, you might not, but I'm an idiot. All right, just like Simon is like,
I don't understand things the first go around. I often need a lot of trial and error to understand something. When I study with my teachers studying yoga, I'm usually right at the front, and I'm asking a lot of questions. And I'm sure some people get annoyed and pissed off at me, and they're like, I wish you'd stop asking questions. But almost every time, one or sometimes several people will come up to me and actually thank me for asking those questions because they didn't understand either, but they weren't going to ask. Or we got into a much deeper discussion than we otherwise would have, because I'm just trying to understand the material through and through. And that's just sort of that is both a strength and weakness of mine. So where a lot of other people might understand things much more easily on a surface level, I usually have to understand something a little bit deeper for me to actually understand it. And that's a pretty typical experience of someone who has dyslexia like me. So a lot of people can just get a kind of a brief overview and understand enough to say pass a test, and get the right answer, or get the right answer they were asked, but they may not understand actually what is, let's switch sides. They may not understand what is going on under the surface. And this is, again, in my understanding, I'm not an expert or anything, but for dyslexics, usually for them to remember something, they have to attach it to a story. So what that means is for me to remember, say, something about yoga or about anatomy or something like that, if you just give me a bunch of facts, this is called this, that's called that, this is this, blah, 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 I won't remember it. I will not remember it because there's no story attached to it. It's just a bunch of random facts, names, okay? So in order for me to remember anatomy, and that's something that I've had doctors comment on how well I understand human anatomy, and that's thanks to my teacher, Paul Grilly. But in order for me to understand that and remember those names, like this is the quadricep muscle group, right? And we have vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, vastus intermedialis, and rectus femoris. Those are the four quadriceps. So in order for me to remember all that, I had to create a story and a picture in my head. Now here's the thing, that usually takes longer. And it also means asking more questions, understanding a little deeper, right? If you just said, here are the four quadricep muscles, and you list them, and then you try and give me a test the next day, I probably am not going to pass that test. I might remember one of them. But a lot of people can just memorize a list like that. And then you think, oh, they know their muscles. But they don't really know the muscles. They don't know how they work. They don't understand, what's going on. So again, it's both a strength and a weakness. So a lot of people, you give them a list, they can memorize it, and then they can seemingly pass a test. It seems like they know what they're talking about. But they will likely forget that list in short order. And they didn't really understand. Again, just because I know the names of the muscles in the quadricep doesn't mean I actually understand them. It doesn't mean I know what they look like. It doesn't mean I understand their function. So as strange as it sounds, I think a lot of people could learn from how dyslexics have to learn. So it's not a choice for me. I have to learn more slowly. I have to kind of be stupid. I have to make mistakes. But once I've gone through that process, I tend to understand things on a very, very deep, intimate level. And I want to encourage other people that don't need to do that because again, it produces a different kind of understanding or learning in the end. All right, so let's unwind onto our back. Okay, we'll bring those legs in, give them a nice squeeze, shake it out. And we'll hinge up. Okay, so we stretched out our quads, we twisted, and now we'll do what's called the saddle pose. So you bring your feet back. Now, problem area in this posture are knees and ankles and feet. So pad your feet if they need it. If your knees hurt, you can try taking them wider. You can try sitting up on something, okay? The toes can point back or out to the sides. And what we're looking for at this stage is no pain in knees, ankles, or feet. Okay, so I want to be as pain-free as possible here and here. Okay, so keep playing with those things, knees, feet, blocks, padding, until you find it. Okay, once you found that position where you're like, okay, I feel safe here, then you want to see, do I feel a stretch in the front of my thighs? Yes or no? So the answer is yes, you will stay here because that is a prerequisite for the next step. If these are not stretched out, then I do not want to take the next step. It will not be safe. Okay? So I want to be very clear about that. So if I'm like, ooh, this is really intense here, then you stay there. If it's not, and it's not for me, you can begin lowering back, hands, elbows onto a bolster, or perhaps all the way back onto your back. This can be a very challenging posture for many people. It can evolve. So if you have not done this posture very often, if you're new to this, then just know that over time with practice, you may one day be able to go back or go back further. This might become your favorite posture, even though today you're really struggling with it. Okay. And it's not uncommon for this to go from someone's most dreaded posture to their favorite posture. Okay. So the key is we want to do it safely, and it has a lot of therapeutic value. Okay, it works the sacroiliac joint in a very unique way, or at least it has the potential to do that. And from my perspective, I sense or feel that this is almost like if you had to pick one posture to counteract or counterbalance sitting at a desk all day, this might be it. This might be the perfect posture to do. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect, actually, that it's going to counterbalance everything from sitting. But if I were to pick one posture that's going to be super impactful, if somebody can do this, then this would probably be what I would recommend. And this is what I personally do. So if I'm feeling a lot of like, oh man, my body just feels awful from sitting, if I have a long car ride or something like that, then I might do this posture for several minutes, and I might do it several times to counterbalance, counteract all those effects. Okay.
Okay, so taking your time, I'm going to unwind from that. And here is the challenging thing about this particular sequence is what we'd like to do now is move in the opposite direction. So again, I think everyone here is okay, but again, I can't really see what's going on the other side of the camera there. So butterfly, soles of feet together, and then we come forward and down. And we're just looking for a gentle stretch along the backside of the spine, okay? So again, for some people, you might feel like, ooh, I don't want to go from bending backward to bending forward like that. If you feel it's unsafe, then just for now, trust that feeling. But again, you might communicate that to me, and I may have some suggestion. I might not. You never know. This is the idea with communication, right? This is why saying, hey, I've got this problem. I've had this with my teachers too, with Paul specifically, my yin teacher. So I've brought up things to him, and he's been like, I don't know, or try this, and it's not been helpful. So again, this is just reality. It doesn't matter if someone's a doctor or a yoga teacher. They may not be able to help you, right? There are people every day who have conditions who go to a doctor, and the doctor gives them something or suggests something, and it doesn't actually help. I meet people like this all the time because people tell me about these kinds of things, right? So that's as much true of me as anyone else. Having said that, I find that like 99% of the time, if someone tells me a difficulty they're having, either the first suggestion or maybe the second or third, we figure it out, and at least their condition has improved. Okay. So again, I can't see what's going on there. Hopefully everyone is doing great. But because of that, I have to sometimes speak about what I see happening in classes. And what I see is usually within every group. Well, I won't say that. Not in every group. But in some groups, I'll see somebody who is clearly struggling, but for whatever reason, they're not willing to communicate with me about what the struggle is. A lot of times I just leave them alone, because if they are not wanting help or they're not willing to ask for it, then I just assume that they don't want it. Sometimes I will go over and be like, are you doing okay? And then a lot of times they're, oh yeah, I'm fine. When they're clearly not, because they're not actually doing the posture. So again, people have their reasons for doing what they're doing. They're an adult, I'm not their babysitter. So I just respect that. If they say they're doing fine, then I'm just going to believe that. But again, I can see they're not doing okay. All right, let's go ahead and unwind from that. So hopefully that wasn't too much for your spine. And that was one complete cycle. We moved the spine side to side, we twisted it, and we brought it back and forth. So we're going to do that again, and possibly in a more intense way, okay? So let's bring our legs in, shake it out, and we'll come up to seated. So here we have the half dragonfly, which is a challenging posture for many, myself included. So legs are wide, and then we fold over the left leg, okay? And what we're looking for is a stretch here. So if you don't feel it, then try rolling your right shoulder back, okay? And it is helpful to hold the foot or strap. Not necessary, but helpful. You may also feel a quite intense stretch here. I do. I have quite a bit of tension
in my adductors and hamstrings. So I feel in fact, this is more intense than what I feel here, but I do still feel it here. And that's what we're trying to target with this posture. At least today we are, okay? So this is called lateral flexion, which is the sideways movement that the spine makes. And again, it's one of the 6 directions that we're trying to move our spine back and forth, right? So we'll do this side, we'll go back the other way, we'll twist again, and then we'll go forward and back. And again, forward and back, for many people, that's the one that often can trigger a sense of, ooh, is this safe? But, why is it safe to twist the spine back and forth, to move it side to side, but not go forward and backward? That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, does it? So this is, I understand why people will come up with ideas and things like, oh, it's not safe to go back and forth, because for some people it may not be, but the key is for some people and in some situations. So again, this is something that I've learned over time, kind of the hard way, that teachers and institutions will, again, just trying to make things very simple, create dogma. They'll create these ideas. Oh, you should never bend the spine forward and backward. Like, you have to do something in between. So they may understand the bigger picture, but they don't always communicate that to the people that they're training and teaching. And again, people don't ask questions. So you get out of your teacher training and you just know you should never move the spine forward and backward. That's dangerous. But you don't actually know why. And what you'll find is people are doing it all the time in different yoga sequences and styles, and they seem okay. So if it's really so dangerous, so awful, then why are they doing okay? Right? And this is a thing we have to ask. And so it's worth keeping in mind. Okay, let's switch sides. All right, so side 2, we want to feel the stretch here primarily, might feel a little bit here as well. Okay, great work, everybody. Let's go ahead and relax back. So that was one. So you can think of it in two ways. There are 3 directions back and forth, or there are 6, right? One direction is one, and then the opposite would be the other. So that would be 2 directions, left and right flexion, or we can think of it as one back and forth movement of 3. Okay, so however you think of it, it's more or less the same thing. Okay, let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze. We're going to shake it out. Our next direction is twisting, what's called rotation. All right, and so we bring our legs in, and what we'd like to do is cross the right knee over the left and drop knees to the left, and we come into what's called twisted roots. So feel free to play around with arm and leg and head position. And, the basics of this posture is basically keeping, or I'll put it this way, moving the hips and the shoulders in opposite directions. So the basic way of thinking of it is the shoulders just stay on the ground. Now, I don't know if you can see, but my shoulder's actually off the ground. So again, this is this is the kind of thing that happens, and I see it happen in yoga all the time, that a teacher might say, try and keep your shoulder on the ground, or keep your shoulder on the ground. And then people think that, oh, I literally have to keep my shoulder down. Okay, there's nothing inherently dangerous if your shoulder comes up a bit. There's nothing inherently bad about it. So the way I'm positioned right now is my knees are a little bit off the ground and my shoulder is a little bit off the ground. I've actually had people ask, is it better for my knees to be on the ground or my shoulder on the ground, right? There's no hard and fast answer for that. Maybe you feel better with your knees down and your shoulder in the air. Maybe you feel better with your shoulder on the ground and your knees in the air. Or maybe like me, you kind of split the difference, okay? So again, if I were in a class and I were to say, keep your shoulder on the ground as you move your legs over, that's because I'm trying to create this twist. And if you do this, I don't know if you all can see on your screen, you will not create a spinal twist, okay? And I've seen people do that. So that's where I might say, keep your shoulder on the ground, or try and keep your shoulder on the ground. It's not because this is dangerous, but it's ineffective. And it's not that when my shoulder lifts a little bit, it's ineffective. It's still effective, but my shoulder is close to the ground, okay? Even if it's not touching the ground. So again, it's just another example of what I'm speaking about, where if we get too literal with things, and people do, I wouldn't talk about this so much if I didn't see it happening. When we get too literal and too dogmatic about things, it really can create problems. And as a spiritual teacher, I see this a lot in spirituality. I see whole groups of people being really militant and yeah, militant is the best way. They're very dogmatic about a certain thing, and it might have been something that was said, just like the shoulder thing. Let's switch sides. So it might have been said in a very pragmatic way, but then it's taken by people who follow a certain teacher or tradition or whatnot as a what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like a moral or ethical. It's taken in a moral or ethical way. So, for instance, there might be something like you should fast on this day or at this time. Well, what's interesting about where we are with modern
science and research is fasting appears to be really good for our health. So there's a lot of research going on there. And, there's some debate. Again, nothing, hardly anything is just clear cut. Here are the black and white facts. There's very often debate and different things. So again, there seems to be a lot of evidence that fasting is really, really good for us to do in some form or another. Now, there's a lot of different ways to fast. But what you find is in certain spiritual traditions, it'll actually be built into the tradition. And they might say, on Fridays, you need to fast. And fasting, again, can take many different forms. So we can fast from food completely, but we can also fast from certain kinds of foods, certain kinds of things. You can also do fasting from technology. So if you're interested in any of this kind of thing, I can point you in the direction of someone who knows much more about that than I do, which is Dave Osprey, and he has a book called Fast This Way. And in that, he talks about sort of like all these different types of fasting. So you can have a spiritual fast, right? But you can also have like a technology fast. Again, a lot of research is coming out right now showing we get these dopamine hits from social media and technology, and it actually can mess up our pleasure receptors in our pleasure system. So we have a hard time feeling happy and feeling okay. And we actually get more and more depressed because we're getting all these little dopamine hits from using our devices. So some people find that if they take a fast from technology, so let's say you said, you know what, I have to use technology for work, but on Friday, when I leave work, I'm going to shut off all my devices and I won't turn them on until Monday when I go back to work. That might be an example of a technology fast, right? And you might do that for your emotional health. Let's switch sides. Or rather come out of it. So an interesting book I've mentioned a few times in the last few classes is Peter Attia's Outlive. Highly recommend it. It's not a yoga book. It's medicine and science-based, but a lot of good information in there. I'm not saying I agree with everything he says. For instance, I'm a pretty big proponent and fan of fasting. He's not. That's just one example of where, we may have a different opinion. And again, even though he's a doctor and a scientist and he's not a big fan of fasting, other doctors and scientists are. So it's not like he has the final word on that. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, let's go ahead and bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze, and we'll come on up. Let's move into tabletop. Do a little bit of a counter stretch here. And then we can tuck those toes and get into our legs and feet a bit. Okay, our final back and forth again is another forward back bend followed by forward bend. So Sphinx or seal. Okay, so your arms can be straight or bent, head held up, drop forward, shoulders depressed or relaxed, legs together or apart. So some people, they might go on a retreat, they might go on vacation, or like I said, you just might choose to fast from technology, devices over a weekend or whatever it is. And some people, they find that it's really impactful, that it really makes a difference. So again, fasting doesn't have to be fasting from food. We can fast from anything where we might feel that there is an unhealthy relationship or an addictive relationship. One thing that's commonly done in Buddhist circles
is the silent retreat. So if you think about a silent retreat, that is a fast from talking. And you might say a fast from most forms of communication, because you might be able to gesture. But I've been on silent retreats before where even that is discouraged. You're not really, just because you're not supposed to talk, you're not really meant to now use sign language or write a bunch of stuff down or gesture and play charades. You're meant to refrain from trying to communicate with others. Now, again, many of us might hear about that and think, oh, that's so extreme, and what would be the point? It sounds miserable. You might feel that way about fasting with food. You might feel that way about fasting from social media. But again, there's a reason why people have been fasting for recorded history. Again, a lot of these spiritual traditions where you find fasting as a part of the tradition, there's a reason for it. It brought people benefit. Otherwise, they wouldn't have kept doing it. They wouldn't do it. Now, my point of bringing all that up is in some of these traditions, these things were built in, and people would do them, and they would likely find benefit. But a lot of times, there just wasn't the scientific research and knowledge to explain why it was beneficial. And so people tended to just blindly follow them. And the truth is that even though something might be very beneficial most of the time, nothing is always beneficial. So it's good to understand why you're doing what you're doing and to know when the exceptions might be, right? When the benefit may not apply in that particular circumstance. All right, so we're going to move again in the opposite direction. And again, this might be something that is beneficial for most people, but not everybody. So there's two ways we can do this. One is sitting up and folding forward. That's called the caterpillar. And I feel it, I feel the sensitivity in my own back because my back is not the healthiest back at this point. I'm healing it, it's getting better, but it's still not 100%, okay? So you can go this way, but you could also go in the opposite direction, which we call a snail, which is a type of inversion. And so, yeah, for me, way more intense. So I'm just going to say I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this. We'll see how it goes. Now, again, with therapeutics, like what we're doing could be considered a therapeutic intervention. For me, let's take me as an example, since my back is not 100%. What I'm doing, I said it's way more intense. So that could go two ways. It could be that I'm hurting myself right now, and then I'll regret this decision later on. I'll be like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that in yin class because now my back is much more sensitive. Or it could go in the opposite direction, where even though right now it's very sensitive, and yes, when I come out of it, I might be like, ooh, I'm really feel really vulnerable in my joints. What I might find is that 10 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour after class, I actually feel much better. And that's what I'm predicting. That's why I'm making the choice I'm making. Here's the thing, though. I've done enough of this that even if this is the wrong choice today, I know I'll be okay, right? I know I'm not creating like permanent damage in my body. And so this is where, experience comes in. This is where trial and error comes in. As you begin to learn how your body interacts with these different shapes and practices, you become better and better able to predict, how something is going to play out and whether something is safe or not. And the reason I can't help you with that is your body is unique. It's yours. Your injuries are yours, right? Your
What you do when you're not in class is yours, right? I can't control that. I don't know. I was teaching a girl on Wednesday and she did a lot of CrossFit, and she was talking about how that affects what she feels in her body. So this is a thing. One person comes to class and they've been sitting at a desk all week and they haven't done any exercise. Someone else comes to class and they've been doing CrossFit every day. They're probably not going to feel the same thing in the postures. And the same things may not even be safe or effective for them. All right, so let's take our time. Let's see how my back does. Yep, so I feel the sensitivity here, but it's nothing overwhelming, nothing too bad. So I think you've all heard me say before that this is often the case. We temporarily might feel worse in order to ultimately feel better long term. That's very, very common of any kind of therapeutic intervention. So think of surgery. If you need a knee replacement, you go in, you get the surgery. Well, temporarily, you're not even going to be able to walk, right? For maybe several weeks. And for months afterwards, you may be in a very painful situation. But the idea is that ultimately you'll be able to walk free of pain. Okay, so that's just a great example of what I'm talking about. All right, let's bring those legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it off. And as usual these days, I'll leave it up to you whether you want to take a break after doing that. It's never a bad idea. I'll just say that. But with this class, because we take breaks along the way, I think it's more or less optional. All right, everyone. So thank you for coming to class. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe you learned something. Again, any questions or if I mentioned something and you want to know more about it, just reach out. Otherwise, have a lovely weekend, and I'll hope to see you in class on Monday. Thanks again.